Okay, folks, welcome back. I've got to say, this one you guys sent in Psalm 28. Well, for me, it's one of the most intense pieces of poetry I think I've ever encountered.
Yeah, it's got everything in there, doesn't it? You've got fear, you've got anger, and ultimately, faith, hope.
It's raw, man. It's King David just laying it all out there. And that's what we're going to try to unpack today. So by the end of this deep dive, we should have a better understanding of not just what David's saying, but how this psalm reflects the human experience of struggling with really tough stuff and ultimately finding that glimmer of, peace.
And I think that's one of the reasons this psalm resonates so much with people even today. It's so honest about those dark emotions that we all feel sometimes. Like right out of the gate in those first couple of verses, David doesn't hold back. He's in a bad place and he's crying out for help.
Yeah, I think sometimes people forget David wasn't just some poet sitting in an ivory tower. This was a warrior king, a guy who'd faced down lions and giants, and still he's here trembling before God, thinking he's about to, bite the dust.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes it so relatable. It's a reminder that no matter who you are or what you've accomplished, everyone experiences moments of despair and vulnerability.
Totally. And it's in those moments you really see the depth of someone's faith. I mean, look at that image of David lifting his hands towards the temple. It's not just a casual prayer, right?
No, not at all. For David, the temple was considered the dwelling place of God on earth. So this gesture was a powerful physical act, a way of reaching out to the divine in the midst of his distress.
It's almost like he's trying to physically touch heaven.
Exactly. It's raw, it's desperate, and you can almost feel the weight of his plea in those words.
And then bam, he shifts gears.
Yeah.
It's not just about him anymore.
Right. It's like he realizes in the middle of his own struggles that there's a bigger picture at play.
So in verse 3, he starts talking about the wicked, the folks who are out there making life even harder. And he doesn't sugarcoat his feelings about them.
It's not one bit. He's angry. He wants justice. And he calls on God to intervene.
And that phrase, permanently demolished, it's pretty intense, right? Makes you wonder what that really meant back then.
Well, remember, this is the Old Testament. We're talking about a time when concepts of justice and punishment were very different from how we view them today.
Okay, but permanently demolished. I mean, did people ever question that kind of language? Like, was there any pushback?
Oh, absolutely. There were always different interpretations and debates about the nature of God's justice. Even within the scriptures, you see a tension between ideas of mercy and judgment. But for David, in that moment, it was about feeling protected, about believing that ultimately good would triumph over evil.
I guess in a world where, you could be betrayed or attacked at any moment, that sense of security would be pretty crucial.
Absolutely. And that's what makes the subtle shift in tone in verse 6 so powerful. It's like a breath of fresh air after all that heaviness.
Yeah, it's like he went from I'm doomed to party time in the blink of an eye.
Well, not quite party time, but definitely a shift from despair to praise. He acknowledges that God has heard his prayer and his heart is filled with gratitude and trust.
Okay, but when he talks about his heart trusting in God, it's not just like a warm, fuzzy feeling, right? It seems way deeper than that.
Right. You have to remember that for the ancient Israelites, the heart wasn't just about emotions. It was seen as the center of your being. Your intellect, your intuition, your will, all of that was encompassed in the heart.
So it's more like, God, I'm putting my whole self in your hands.
Exactly. And that kind of trust is what allows him to find strength and joy, even in the midst of his struggles.
It's interesting, we talk about gut feelings today, and it's like, that's kind of what they meant by the heart, right? That deep inner knowing.
Yeah, there's definitely a connection there. It's about trusting that inner voice, that connection to something beyond ourselves.
And then he takes it a step further. It's not just about his personal struggles anymore.
Right. In verses 8 and 9, we see a widening of perspective. It becomes a communal prayer. David asks for God's protection, not just for himself, but for all his people.
Yeah, there's that beautiful image of God as a shepherd carrying his flock. It's so comforting.
It is. And I think that image speaks to our deep human need to feel safe and cared for, especially when we're going through tough times.
Totally. It's like even a king needs to know he's not alone in the struggle.
Exactly. And that's what makes this psalm so enduring. It speaks to that universal human experience of facing challenges, finding strength and faith, and ultimately finding hope even in the darkest of moments.
So he started with this intense personal plea and ended up with this broader message of communal hope and resilience. Talk about a roller coaster of emotions.
It's a reminder that even in the face of despair, there's always the possibility of trust and even triumph.
It's a powerful psalm. And it makes you think, right? Here's David, a king with all the power and resources in the world, and yet his struggles are still so relatable. So what about you? Where do you see your own life reflected in these themes of despair, trust, and ultimately finding that strength to keep going? Because maybe even without a throne, we're all a little bit like King David sometimes.
Absolutely. It's a timeless message that continues to resonate with people from all walks of life.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, folks, and keep those questions coming.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time.
See yous.